What if you had the chance to talk to a childhood friend after 30 years? What would you say? Now, what if that friend was a global icon? Today's story is about a letter that crossed 3 decades of silence, reconnecting two people from Long Beach who couldn't have taken more different paths. This is a journey of nostalgia, struggle, and the surprising ways we can save each other. If you believe in the power of second chances and lifelong connections, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is for you. The afternoon sun in Long Beach, California, had a way of making everything look tired. It bleached the color from the awnings of the small storefronts and baked the dust into the cracked sidewalks of Anaheim Street. From his second story, apartment window, Jamal Washington watched the world go by, a world that felt like it had been moving on without him for years. The air was thick with the scent of sea salt and car exhaust, a familiar perfume that no longer smelled like home, but like a place he was simply stuck in. It was a listless Tuesday, a carbon copy of the Monday before it. Inside, the small apartment, was a museum of a life half-lived. A collection of tools for a contracting business that had folded 5 years ago gathered dust in a corner. Framed photos on the wall showed a younger, smiling Jamal with his late wife, their images slowly fading under the relentless California sun. He ran a hand over his weary face, the faint tremor in his fingers a constant reminder of the nerve it took just to get through each day. He felt every one of his 47 years, each one a weight pressing down on his shoulders, a stark contrast to the boundless energy he once had. His gaze fell upon a dusty shoebox tucked under a coffee table. He hadn't opened it in a decade, but something compelled him today. Kneeling down, he lifted the lid, releasing the musty scent of old cardboard and older memories. Inside, nestled amongst report cards and concert ticket stubs, was a faded Polaroid. 2 lanky teenagers, arms slung around each other, grinning at the camera. One was him, all teeth and youthful confidence. The other, skinny and tall with braids, just starting, was his best friend, Calvin Broadus. A wave of nostalgia, so potent it almost knocked him off balance, washed over him. He remembered those days with a painful clarity. Riding bikes down Pacific Avenue, sharing cheap headphones, to listen to the latest mixtapes, dreaming of futures that seemed not just possible, but guaranteed. They were inseparable, 2 kids against the world, navigating the tough streets of Long Beach with the invincibility of youth. Calvin always had the rhymes, the smooth flow, and a charisma that was impossible to ignore, even back then. Jamal thought about Calvin, or as the entire world now knew him, Snoop Dogg. He'd see him on TV, hear his voice on the radio, a constant, distant echo of their shared past. It was surreal, like watching a character from a dream living in the real world. He felt a strange mix of pride and a deep gnawing sorrow, pride for his old friend's monumental success, and sorrow for the chasm that had opened between their lives, a gap so wide it seemed impossible to cross. The shared dreams of their youth had splintered into 2 vastly different realities. He wondered if Calvin ever thought about him, about those days before the fame, the money, the empire. Did he remember the taste of the cheap burgers they'd buy, or the sound of the waves crashing at the pier where they shared their secrets? Or were those memories buried under layers of celebrity, lost in a haze of world tours and platinum records? The question hung in the stale air of his apartment, a silent testament to the 30 years of silence that stretched between them. With a sudden, unshakable resolve, Jamal pulled a pen and a piece of paper from a drawer. His hand, usually trembling, was steady. He wasn't sure what he was going to write or even why. It felt like a foolish, desperate act, a message in a bottle thrown into an ocean of fame. But the silence had become too heavy to bear. He needed to know if the boy he knew was still in there somewhere, behind the sunglasses and the global brand. He began to write, the words flowing out of him not as a fan writing to a star, but as a man writing to his old friend. He didn't mention his struggles, his failed business, or the profound loneliness that had become his closest companion. Instead, he wrote about the past. He wrote about the rickety basketball hoop in his backyard, the long summer afternoons, and a specific promise they made to each other under the bleachers at Polytechnic High School. He described the memory with vivid detail, the smell of cut grass, the distant shouts of the football team, and the shared conviction in their teenage eyes. They had promised to always have each other's back, no matter where life took them. It was a childish pact, perhaps, but it was made with all the sincerity their young hearts could muster. He asked a simple question at the end of the letter. "Do you remember, Cal?" He folded the paper, put it in an envelope, and addressed it to Snoop Dogg's official fan mail P.O. box, a long shot he found after a quick search online. He knew the odds of it ever reaching Calvin were slim to none, likely to be screened out by a team of assistants. It would probably end up in a recycling bin, an unread relic of a forgotten friendship. Walking to the post office felt different. The sun didn't seem as harsh. The city sounds less jarring. For the first time in a long time, he had done something without knowing the outcome, an act of pure, unadulterated hope. Dropping the letter into the blue mailbox, he felt a small piece of the weight on his shoulders lift. He didn't expect a reply. Just sending the letter, just acknowledging the past, was enough. Back in his apartment, the silence returned. But it was different now. It was no longer empty, but filled with a quiet anticipation. He had cast his line into the vast ocean of time and distance. Now, all he could do was wait. He looked at the old Polaroid again, at the two smiling kids, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile back, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and briefly erased the weariness etched upon his face. In a sprawling mansion in a manicured, gated community miles and a universe away from Long Beach, Calvin Broadus sat in his home studio. The room was a testament to his success, a state-of-the-art playground of mixing boards, microphones, and platinum records that lined the walls like expensive wallpaper. Outside, the Southern California weather was perfect. A gentle breeze rustling, the palm trees that dotted his private, resort-like backyard. But inside the soundproofed room, Calvin felt a familiar restlessness, a creative itch he couldn't quite scratch. His life was a well-oiled machine, managed by a team of publicists, agents, and assistants who handled every detail, from his business ventures to his public appearances. He was a brand, an icon, a living legend. Yet, some days, he felt more like a product than a person. His own identity lost somewhere between Snoop Dogg the persona and Calvin Broadus the man. The constant hum of the industry was a soundtrack he couldn't turn off, a stark contrast to the G-funk beats that had started it all. An assistant entered quietly, placing a small stack of fan mail on the corner of his console. "Just the screened ones, Snoop," she said, her voice professional and distant. He usually let his team handle it all, but today, for some reason, he waved a hand. "Leave it. I'll look through 'em." She nodded and exited, leaving him once again in the hermetically sealed silence of his creative sanctuary. He sifted through the letters idly, most of them filled with adoring praise, lyrical suggestions, or demo tapes from hopeful artists. Then, he saw it. An envelope, plain and unassuming with a Long Beach postmark. His eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't get much mail from the old neighborhood anymore. His fingers, adorned with heavy rings, carefully tore it open. The handwriting was neat, familiar in a way he couldn't immediately place. He began to read, his public face slowly melting away as the words on the page pulled him back through time, back through the decades of fame and fortune. The letter wasn't from a fan. It was from Jamal. The name hit him like a physical blow, a ghost from a life he hadn't truly lived in 30 years. Jamal Washington, his best friend, his neighbor, the guy who had taught him how to fix a bike chain and who had been there the first time he ever got his heart broken. The memories, long, dormant, came rushing back with an almost violent force, vivid and raw. He read the letter once, then twice, the part about the promise they made under the bleachers at Poly High. He closed his eyes, and he was there. He could smell the grass, feel the splintered wood of the bleachers against his back. He remembered the fierce loyalty in Jamal's eyes, the unwavering belief he had in Calvin's talent long before anyone else. It was a pact made in the innocence of youth, a promise to be anchors for each other in the turbulent sea of life. A profound sadness settled over him, heavy and suffocating. He had kept his side of the pact in spirit, he thought. But had he really? He'd become a star, traveled the world, and built an empire. But he'd let the ropes connecting him to his past fray and snap one by one. Jamal wasn't just a friend. He was a cornerstone of his foundation, a part of the bedrock upon which Snoop Dogg was built. And he had let him fade away. The curated perfection of his mansion suddenly felt cold and sterile. The platinum records on the wall seemed to mock him, shiny symbols of a success that had cost him more than he realized. He looked out the window at the pristine swimming pool, but he didn't see the sparkling water. He saw the murky, cracked pavement of his old block, the laughter and struggles that had shaped him, the faces of people he had lost touch with, not through malice, but through the sheer, overwhelming momentum of his own life. He thought about Jamal's question. "Do you remember, Cal?" It was so simple, yet so deeply complex. Remembering was easy. The hard part was confronting what that memory meant, what had been lost in the intervening years. The letter contained no request for money or a handout, which almost made it worse. It was a simple, human reach across a vast divide, asking for nothing more than acknowledgement. His assistant buzzed on the intercom. "Mr. Broadus, you have that conference call with the marketing team in 5 minutes." Usually he'd slide seamlessly back into the role of Snoop Dogg, the businessman. But today, the name felt alien. "Cancel it," he said, his voice raspy. "Clear my schedule for the rest of the day, and get me a secure private line. No, on second thought, don't. I'll handle it myself." He stood up and walked out of the studio, leaving the multi-million-dollar equipment behind. He went to his personal office, a room filled with family photos and sports memorabilia rather than music awards. He found a pen and a piece of his own personal stationery. The idea of having an assistant type a reply felt like a betrayal. This was a debt he had to pay himself, a conversation he had to have as Calvin, not Snoop. He started to write back, his own hand feeling slightly clumsy after years of firing off texts and emails. He didn't know where to begin, how to explain 30 years of silence. "I remember," he wrote, the two words feeling both inadequate and monumentally important. "I remember everything." He paused, the weight of all the unsaid things settling in the quiet, sunlit room, a stark contrast to the dusty apartment where his old friend waited. Mid-roll music with a hopeful, building beat starts and fades to the background. Host. The connection has been made. A bridge, however fragile, has been built across 30 years. But what happens when nostalgia meets reality? When two different worlds collide, the impact can change everything. If you're finding this story as fascinating as we are, do us a favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and it lets us know you want more stories about real human connections. Now, let's get back to Jamal and Calvin. A week had passed, and for Jamal, the world had slowly reverted to its previous state of gray. The brief flicker of hope he'd felt after mailing the letter had dimmed with each passing day. He told himself it was a foolish gesture, a moment of weakness. He was a middle-aged man, clinging to a teenage memory, trying to get the attention of a superstar. He started to feel a flush of embarrassment, imagining his heartfelt letter being laughed at by a group of interns in a high-rise office in Los Angeles. He was in his small kitchen, making a cup of instant coffee, the spoon clinking rhythmically against the cheap ceramic mug. The morning marine layer had rolled in, blanketing Long Beach in a cool, damp haze that mirrored his own mood. He expected nothing, so when he shuffled to his front door to pick up the mail pushed through the slot, his heart didn't even skip a beat. It was the usual collection: bills, junk mail, a grocery store flyer. But then he saw it. Tucked between a credit card offer and a utility bill was a cream-colored envelope, thick and heavy. It had no return address, just his name and address, written in a familiar, slightly flamboyant script he hadn't seen in 3 decades. His breath caught in his throat. His hands, which had been so steady when he wrote his own letter, now trembled uncontrollably as he tore open the seal, nearly ripping the letter inside. The stationery was expensive, he could feel it, but the words were what mattered. I remember everything." Jamal had to sit down. The linoleum floor of his hallway suddenly the only stable thing in his world. He read the 2 short sentences over and over, the words a balm on a wound he hadn't realized was so deep. Calvin remembered. He hadn't forgotten. It was a simple confirmation, but it felt like a seismic event, shifting the very foundations of his lonely existence. The letter continued. Calvin's voice emerging from the ink, a little older, a little more measured, but unmistakably his. He wrote about how Jamal's letter had hit him, how it had brought back a flood of memories he kept locked away. He mentioned a specific detail Jamal had forgotten: the time they'd tried to build a go-kart out of a stolen shopping cart and a lawnmower engine, a disastrous and hilarious failure. He ended the letter with a private email address and a simple request: "Write me back. Tell me how you're doing, man. For real." Jamal felt a whirlwind of emotions. Relief, so profound it was almost painful. Joy, a bright, unfamiliar sensation. But underneath it all, a current of anxiety. Tell me how you're doing. How could he even begin to answer that? His life was a testament to disappointment, a stark contrast to the meteoric success Calvin had achieved. How could he describe the shame of his failed business, the quiet grief for his wife, the daily struggle to find a reason to get out of bed? For 2 days he agonized over the reply. He typed and deleted, wrote and crumpled up drafts. He was afraid of sounding like he was complaining, or worse, like he was angling for a handout. The gap between them was no longer just about time and distance. It was a chasm of experience and fortune. How do you talk about being unemployed to a man who likely had a team of financial advisors? How do you explain the feeling of being invisible to someone who couldn't walk down the street without being mobbed? Finally, he decided on the only path he could take: the truth, but a carefully curated version of it. He sat at his old desktop, computer, the monitor humming, and began to type. He told Calvin about his wife, Maria, and how much he missed her. He mentioned that his contracting work had slowed down, a gentle euphemism for its complete collapse. He focused more on the good memories, sharing a few more of his own, building on the ones Calvin had mentioned. He wrote about the changes in Long Beach, how some of their old hangouts were gone, replaced by chain stores and new developments. He described the persistent smell of the ocean and the sound of the foghorns in the morning, grounding their conversation in the shared sensory landscape of their youth. He tried to paint a picture of his life without begging for sympathy, to be honest without being pitiful. It was one of the hardest things he had ever written. He hit send before he could second-guess himself again, the email disappearing into the digital ether. The exchange felt surreal, a secret conversation happening in the background of their vastly different lives. In his mansion, Calvin was probably preparing for a show or a meeting. In his small apartment, Jamal was worrying about how he was going to pay next month's rent. Yet, through a thin digital thread, they were connected again. The reply came faster than he expected, less than a day later. "I'm sorry to hear about Maria, man," it began. "I remember she had the best smile." The simple, personal acknowledgement meant the world to Jamal. Calvin didn't offer platitudes or empty condolences. He shared a memory, a small, specific detail that showed he was truly listening, that he was present in the conversation. The email continued, and for the first time, Jamal sensed a crack in Snoop's cool facade. "Life gets crazy, you know." Calvin wrote, "You're running so fast you forget to look around. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing a character everyone expects me to be. Reading your letter was like opening a window and getting a breath of real air." It was a moment of vulnerability Jamal never expected. A confession that the view from the top wasn't always as perfect as it seemed. The chasm between them, just for a moment, felt a little smaller. The emails became a regular occurrence, a quiet ritual that punctuated both of their lives. For Jamal, they were a lifeline, a reason to get up in the morning. For Calvin, they were an escape, a portal back to a time before his life was scheduled in 15-minute increments. They fell into an easy rhythm, their correspondence a blend of past and present, a tapestry woven from shared history and separate realities. They carefully avoided the most difficult topics, Jamal's finances and Calvin's fame, circling them like two boxers in a ring. Jamal found himself looking at his old neighborhood with new eyes. As he wrote to Calvin about the changes, he started paying more attention. He described the new murals that had popped up in the East Village Arts District, the way the light hit the water at Shoreline Aquatic Park in the late afternoon, the sounds of the skaters at the Cherry Park skate park. He was no longer just existing in his environment. He was observing it, documenting it, and in doing so, reconnecting with it. Calvin, in turn, shared glimpses of his world that the public never saw. He didn't talk about the celebrity parties or the glamour. Instead, he wrote about the exhaustion of touring, the strange loneliness of hotel rooms that all looked the same, and the pressure of maintaining an image. "People see the dog," he wrote one night from a hotel in Germany. "They don't see the skinny kid from 21st Street. Sometimes, I'm not even sure he's still in here. Talking to you brings him out." Their conversations started to change. The initial nostalgia, while still present, began to give way to deeper, more meaningful discussions. Jamal, feeling more confident, started to open up about his sense of purposelessness. "It's not about the money, Cal," he wrote one evening, the words flowing more easily now. "It's about feeling like you're contributing something. My dad, he was a mechanic. He fixed things. I used to fix things. Now, I just feel broken." That email struck a chord with Calvin. He was a global entertainer, a businessman, an investor. He had built an empire. But Jamal's words made him question the nature of his own contributions. Was he fixing anything? He entertained people, sold products, created a brand. But Jamal's simple, profound desire to fix things resonated with a part of him that felt increasingly disconnected from the tangible world. He realized how much of his life was spent in the abstract realms of media and finance. One day, Calvin sent an email with a subject line that just said, "Remember this?" Attached was a scanned photo. It wasn't one of him and Jamal. It was a picture of a beat-up youth community center near Martin Luther King Jr. Park, a place they had both spent countless hours as kids, a safe haven from the streets. It was where they played basketball, did homework, and stayed out of trouble. "Heard it's pretty run down these days," the email read. Shame. Jamal knew the place well. He passed it often. It was more than run down. It was barely functioning. The roof leaked, the basketball court was full of cracks, and the after-school programs he and Calvin had relied on were long gone due to budget cuts. It was a symbol of the neighborhood's decline, another casualty of neglect and indifference. He wrote back, describing the state of the center in detail, the sadness and anger evident in his words. A few days later, another email from Calvin arrived. This one was different. It was short and to the point. "I've been thinking about what you said, about fixing things. I got an idea, a crazy one. You got a passport? And are you willing to take a flight?" Jamal stared at the screen, his heart pounding. A flight? A passport? What was Calvin thinking? The question was both thrilling and terrifying. A sudden, sharp turn in the path of their correspondence. The carefully constructed wall between their two worlds was about to be breached. The conversation was no longer just about emails and memories. Calvin was proposing something real, something tangible. Jamal felt a jolt of fear. It was one thing to confess his feelings of aimlessness from the safety of his apartment. It was another thing entirely to be confronted with a potential solution, one that would force him out of his self-imposed exile and into the bright, intimidating glare of Calvin's world. He thought about all the reasons to say no. The fear of failure, the embarrassment of his situation, the comfort of his familiar misery. It was easier to stay where he was, to keep their friendship confined to the safe space of the internet. Saying yes would mean confronting the chasm between them, head-on, in person. It would mean being vulnerable in a way he hadn't been since his wife passed away. But then he thought about the alternative. Staying in his apartment, watching the sun bleach the life out of his neighborhood, waiting for things to get better, on their own. He looked at the old Polaroid of him and Calvin, the two invincible teenagers. He remembered the promise under the bleachers. Always have each other's back. Maybe this was what it looked like, 30 years later. Not a handout, but a hand up. With a deep breath, Jamal typed his reply. 3 simple words that would change the course of his life. A leap of faith across the digital divide that separated them. He wrote, "Yes. What's the plan?" The moment he hit send, he knew there was no going back. The quiet conversation between two old friends was about to get very loud. The plan, as Calvin laid it out, was both audacious and deeply personal. He wanted to quietly fund the complete renovation of the old Long Beach Youth Center. But he didn't want to just throw money at it. He didn't want it to be a Snoop Dogg project, a PR move managed by his foundation. He wanted it to be real, to be from the heart, and he wanted Jamal to run it. "You know how to build things," he wrote. "I don't. You know the neighborhood." "I don't. Not anymore. I can provide the fuel, but you gotta drive the car." Jamal was flown to Los Angeles, the first time he'd been on a plane in 15 years. The culture shock was immediate and overwhelming. A black town car picked him up and whisked him away to a meeting, not at Calvin's mansion, but at a neutral, discreet office building in Beverly Hills. When Calvin walked in for a moment, they were just two middle-aged men, staring at each other across a polished mahogany table. The famous persona was gone. This was just Cal, his eyes holding a mixture of warmth, awkwardness, and expectation. The first obstacle became apparent almost immediately: the scale of the operation. Calvin had his business manager, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Cynthia, sit in on the meeting. She laid out the budget, the legal requirements, the permits. Jamal, who had once run a small two-man contracting crew, was suddenly faced with spreadsheets, liability forms, and a budget with more zeros than he had ever seen in his life. He felt completely out of his depth, a sense of panic rising in his chest. Cynthia was polite but skeptical. She saw Jamal as a risk, an unknown variable in a project her client was emotionally invested in. "Mr. Washington," she said, her tone clinical, "your experience is in residential construction. This is a major public works project. It requires navigating city bureaucracy, managing multiple subcontractors, and strict adherence to safety codes. Are you certain you are equipped to handle this?" The question hung in the air, a direct challenge to his competence. For a moment, Jamal faltered. The old feelings of failure and inadequacy washed over him. He was just a guy from a dusty apartment, a man whose last business went bankrupt. Who was he to run a multi-million-dollar renovation? He looked at Calvin, who gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent message of encouragement. It was the same look he used to give him on the basketball court before a tough shot. That look was all it took. Jamal straightened up, a fire he hadn't felt in years igniting within him. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, his voice firm, "I've been navigating Long Beach my whole life. I know the people, I know the pitfalls, and I know what that center needs more than any spreadsheet can tell you. I don't just know how to build walls. I know how to build what needs to go inside them. Give me the chance, and I'll prove it." The second obstacle was more personal. As the project started to take shape, Jamal had to become a leader. He had to hire a crew, not of strangers, but of people from the neighborhood. Some of them were old faces he knew, guys who had fallen on hard times just like him. Leading them wasn't easy. There was resentment from some, who saw him as just lucky, the guy who happened to know Snoop Dogg. He had to earn their respect not through his connection to Calvin, but through his own hard work and fairness. There was a particularly difficult moment with a subcontractor who was cutting corners on materials. Jamal confronted him, and the man sneered, "What do you care? It's not your money." The comment stung, hitting at the very heart of his insecurity. But instead of backing down, Jamal stood his ground. "You're right. It's not my money," he said calmly. "It's for the kids on 21st Street. It's for the next generation. So we're going to do it right, or we're not going to do it at all." He fired the man on the spot, an act that solidified his authority and earned the crew's loyalty. Meanwhile, Calvin faced his own set of challenges. He had to keep the project under wraps. The moment the media got wind that Snoop Dogg was involved, it would turn into a circus. It would become about him, not the community. He funneled the money through a series of LLCs and charitable fronts, a complex financial dance managed by Cynthia, who was slowly coming around as she saw Jamal's progress reports. Calvin found a new kind of excitement in this secret venture, a satisfaction that was different from releasing a hit record. The biggest test of their renewed friendship came during a late-night phone call. The project had hit a snag with a city permit, a classic case of bureaucratic red tape. Jamal was frustrated and exhausted. "I don't know if I can do this, Cal," he confessed, the weight of the responsibility crushing him. "I'm in over my head." He expected Calvin to offer a simple solution, to make a call to some powerful person he knew and fix it. Instead, Calvin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I can't fix this for you, man. That ain't the deal. You said you knew how to navigate the city, so navigate it. You're Jamal Washington, the guy who taught me how to talk to girls, the guy who could fix anything with duct tape and a prayer. You got this. It wasn't the answer Jamal wanted, but it was the one he needed. It was a sign of respect, a confirmation that Calvin saw him not as a charity case, but as a partner. Jamal hung up the phone, a renewed sense of determination coursing through him. Calvin was right. He wasn't a passenger in this story. He was the driver. The next morning, he didn't call Cynthia or Calvin. He went down to the city planning office himself. He spent the entire day talking to clerks, supervisors, and inspectors, not as a representative of a celebrity, but as a lifelong resident of Long Beach who cared about his community. He explained the project, its goals, and its importance. By the end of the day, he had the permit. He had fixed it himself. 6 months later, the transformation was complete. The dilapidated youth center was reborn. A new roof gleamed under the California sun. The once cracked basketball court was a smooth expanse of bright blue and orange, and the windows, no longer boarded up, shone brightly. Inside, fresh paint, new equipment, and a small, state-of-the-art computer lab had replaced the dust and decay. It wasn't just a renovated building. It was a beacon of hope, a testament to what was possible. The grand reopening was a neighborhood affair. The street was blocked off, and a block party was in full swing. The air was filled with the smell of barbecue, the sound of music, old-school funk and soul, not modern hip-hop, and the laughter of children. Jamal stood near the entrance, wearing a simple polo shirt with the center's new logo, watching the scene unfold. He was no longer the weary, defeated man from the dusty apartment. He was tired, yes, but it was the good kind of tired. The kind that comes from hard work and a deep sense of accomplishment. He had not only rebuilt the center, he had rebuilt himself. He was the full-time director now, a role he had earned. He had a purpose again. He was fixing things. He watched as kids who were previously hanging out on street corners were now eagerly signing up for basketball leagues and computer classes. He saw parents from the neighborhood, people he had hired for the renovation, now volunteering their time. He hadn't just managed a construction project, he had helped reignite a community's spirit. A quiet, familiar figure appeared beside him, wearing a simple tracksuit and a hat pulled down low. It was Calvin, who had slipped in through a back entrance, avoiding the main crowd. He looked at the thriving, joyful scene, a genuine, unforced smile on his face. "You did good, man," he said, his voice soft, filled with a mixture of pride and awe. "You really did good. It's better than I ever imagined." "We did good," Jamal corrected him, clapping a hand on his friend's shoulder. "This was your vision." Calvin shook his head. "Nah. The vision was just money and guilt. You gave it a soul." They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Two men from 21st Street, their 30-year-long divergent paths finally converging at the place where it all began. The chasm between them had been filled, not with money, but with shared purpose. Later, as the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the party, Calvin turned to Jamal. "You know," he said, "for the last 20 years, my success has been measured in record sales and ticket stubs. It's all numbers. But this..." He gestured to a group of kids learning how to use the new computers, their faces illuminated by the screens. "This feels different. This feels real. You didn't just change your life, man. You changed mine too." He finally understood what it meant to fix something. The story of the anonymous donor eventually leaked, as such things often do. But by then, it didn't matter. The narrative wasn't about a celebrity swooping in to save the day. The narrative, as told by the people in the neighborhood, was about Jamal Washington, one of their own, who stepped up and brought their community center back to life. He was the hero of the story. Calvin's involvement was just a footnote, which was exactly how he wanted it. The change in both men was profound and lasting. Jamal found a new life, one filled with purpose, community, and the quiet dignity of meaningful work. He was no longer haunted by the past, but was actively building a better future for those following in his footsteps. His apartment was no longer a tomb of memories, but a home, a place to rest after a long day of making a difference. Calvin, too, was transformed. The project had reconnected him to his roots in a way he never thought possible. It had grounded him, reminding him of the value of tangible, community-focused work. He started to approach his own life and career with a new perspective. seeking out projects that had a soul, not just a price tag. The restlessness he had felt in his sterile studio had been replaced by a quiet sense of fulfillment. The conversation that started with a single, hopeful letter had, against all odds, changed both of their lives, proving that it's never too late to rebuild a broken foundation. An incredible story of how a simple letter, a reach into the past, can completely reshape the future. It shows us that true wealth isn't just about what you have, but about what you give and what you build. What did you think of Jamal and Calvin's journey? Could you relate to that feeling of being disconnected and wanting to find purpose? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit that like button. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.